Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for December 5th, 2023. Today I'm going to be discussing what might be called the forgotten war. Of course, it's not forgotten if you live in Ukraine. It's certainly not forgotten if you live in Russia. And for much of the world, it's something that will not be forgotten for a long time. But in terms of the shift in the world attention away from Ukraine to Gaza, you might consider this to be a forgotten war. And for the sake of people like Biden and the military-industrial complex of NATO, they would like you to forget it. Now, Chuck Schumer, the senator from New York, has set up a video meeting with President Zelensky for today to have what he called a, quote, important briefing on the Ukraine war. Now, this comes as the director of the National Budget Office said that without a vote by Congress to back Biden's supplemental budget package, which is $105 billion split between Ukraine and the Middle East, there'll be no more funds to pay for the weapons that are needed by Ukraine. And this is the reason for the urgent video conference set up by Schumer. Now, Schumer said, we are, quote, defending democracy, as he's pushing continuously on this fake talking point. He said, if Ukraine funding remains blocked, Putin will, quote, keep going, unquote. Keep going where? This idea that we're defending democracy from a rampaging new Russian empire is a complete fraud. And yet it's all you hear from the mainstream media and from most politicians in the United States in both parties. They're requesting an additional $61.4 billion for Ukraine, and as part of a $100 billion package. Now, in addition to this briefing, Zelensky sent a organizing team, essentially lobbyists, to visit Republican congressmen, Republican senators, to demand more funds. Now, last week, House Speaker Mike Johnson was in Florida, where he expressed confidence that the House will pass this new supplemental budget package for both Israel, which he's introduced as a separate bill, and Ukraine. Johnson said, while Israel is the highest priority, Ukraine is another priority. And just as in the case of Schumer, he said, we can't allow Vladimir Putin to march through Europe, unquote, as if Putin is actually intending to march through Europe. Now, Johnson is trying to link the funds for Ukraine to money for the U.S. border. This is going to be a no-go for the Senate. So it looks as though we'll be going into the new year with no more funds for Ukraine. Now, the real issue is why send more funds, another $60+ billion, for a losing war? It's already been lost. You have internal squabbles in Ukraine between the government, that is Zelensky, and the military, in particular the military commander Zaluzny. Zelensky is very low in the polls. He's talking about canceling the upcoming elections. One of his would-be competitors, the mayor of Kiev, Klitschko, has already said the war is lost. It's unwinnable, as did Zaluzny. So this is rippling through the population of Ukraine, which is being asked to sacrifice more people. And now they're trying to come to the United States and ask for more money. Now, there's an analysis from Jacques Beau, who's a former Swiss military intelligence figure, in Die Weltwoche newspaper. And what he said is, quite simply, the West has lost. The biggest mistake was underestimating Russia and overestimating NATO's power. He said the Western goal of a regime change in Russia is not happening. What else is not happening? The destruction of the Russian economy. Russia has emerged from this stronger than ever. The isolation of Russia. That's not happening either. Russia is more involved now through the BRICS, through alliances with China and the global South than it was before. But what has occurred is the destruction of Ukraine, and a further loss of credibility for the United States. The first mistake was rejecting Putin's request for negotiating security requirements for both Ukraine and Russia. This was pushed by Putin from 2014 to 2021, December 2021. The West refused to negotiate. They said there are no legitimate security concerns for Russia. NATO is not an offensive alliance, even as NATO moved step by step by step closer to the Russian border. Second mistake, they lied about the Minsk agreement. They offered a negotiated settlement for achieving some of Putin's goals and also for Ukraine, but this was rejected. It turned out that it was admitted by Merkel and Hollande, the German chancellor and the French president, and by Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, that they never intended to abide by the paper that they signed to end the conflict in the Donbass. So this is another example of Western duplicity and fakery. The third mistake is they rejected the Ukraine-Russia agreement that was reached in March 2022, which could have ended the war in the first month. So mistake after mistake is compounded. Now, we heard from Lloyd Austin at the Reagan National Security Conference just a couple of days ago that the good news is there will be $50 billion more to go to modernize the U.S. defense industrial base. This will create jobs, and it's part of an overall $170 billion additional allocation for the arms procurement. Now, why is this so important? They're trying to portray the lost war in Ukraine as having been good for the U.S. economy, a war economy that can't win a war. Now, this was mocked by former Russian President Medvedev, who said that this exposes the real aim of the war, not a defense of democracy, but to modernize the military-industrial complex. So with the Ukraine war increasingly unpopular, the Gaza war is the new arena for this project, with military action for Iran and China a little bit further down the road. This shows that the agenda is for permanent war of both parties in Congress, of the president, of much of Europe. What's been the effect of permanent war since 1979? The Afghan situation. The U.S. was at war initially through building up the Taliban and then going to war to try and topple the Taliban and eventually losing to the Taliban. Panama, overthrowing a government there on fake pretenses. Iraq, twice. Yugoslavia, Libya, Syria, now Ukraine. One war after another, adding to the national debt. The total national debt, now over $33 trillion. We're still paying for that. We're paying $1 trillion a year now for interest on that debt, and they want to ramp it up higher as supposedly an economic policy that's good for the United States. So money flows through the bought-off Congress to the military-industrial complex and to bail out bankrupt corporations, initially through quantitative easing and now through continued refusal to put the economy through banking reorganization, going back to Glass-Steagall, and through bankruptcy organization. Instead, there's also money available for cyber warfare and censorship to keep the American people stupefied into thinking that we actually are having an economic recovery and that we're saving the world for democracy. Well, as a result, there's no money for necessary social programs such as education, health care, infrastructure, and so on. Biden's popularity is collapsing at home, and the U.S. is discredited internationally. Now, on top of this, the big issue, the green issue, is proving to be, as we warned, a false story. The COP28 conference that's underway right now is a flop. The latest example of this is India, as one of the key nations of the developing sector of the global south, rejected the end of using coal for India, which was one of the key principles put forward for the purpose of this convention. Much of the world is rejecting the colonialism of this period, colonialism in a new package, but nevertheless, people recognize it around the world as a colonial policy. So this weekend, we'll have a conference in Nicaragua on Helga Zepp-LaRouche's 10 Principles of a New Security and Development Architecture. This is the direction for the future: investment in physical economy for mutually beneficial cooperation. This is the way you end wars. The basis for peace is mutual economic development. And I'll have the 10 principles again linked on the description page in case you haven't studied them yet. So the question is, will you join us to put an end to this insanity brought to you by the military-industrial complex through both parties and most of the political parties in Europe? Will you join us now? Or will we go to the end when the world either ends in a nuclear war or a total depression, collapse, and depopulation?